Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. It is April 19th, a Friday, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about a new transfer portal rule that has just been passed, along with a NIL rule that we will get to here in the first segment. Then we're going to jump into a little bit of a Colorado update. Everyone is talking about the Colorado Buffaloes, as they do very often, and I want to break down what's going on with them heading into the second year under Dion. Then we're going to get into some spring game previews. A ton of stuff going on Saturday, so definitely want to break down everything for you guys there. And then we will get to Cinderella candidates for 2024. But before we jump into all of that, I want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have kind of a fun interactive experience here, ask a question, make a comment, and I can read it out loud and we can have a fun back and forth. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Before we jump into the first segment, I do want to address the elephant in the room. If you do see, if you are watching live, first of all, thank you so much for watching live. It does mean a lot to me in the network in general, but you might see a premiere in the corner of the screen. That is because this is a pre-recorded show that I'm doing here today. This is not a thing that is going to continue very long. I will be back live on Monday, so no worries there, but I need to do one pre-recorded show here because I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so wanted to make sure you guys had something to watch, something to keep you updated on the world of college football. But let's jump in. Let's talk about this new unlimited transfer rule, this new NIL rule, and let's start with the transfer rule because that feels like what everyone has a big-time opinion on, right? Everyone has been looking for some answers to what is going on in the transfer portal and what will go on in the transfer portal for the next couple of years. And a new rule has just allowed multi-time transfers to get immediate eligibility. So essentially that rule that was in place for quite some time where you could transfer once with no penalty, but then the second time you had to either get a waiver or sit out one of the academic years to be able to play. That is no longer in place. Now, it wasn't in place for the past couple of months just because there was a little bit of a temporary restraining order that was filed in West Virginia because of Raekwon Battle, who was a basketball player at West Virginia. He was a third-time transfer, and they wanted him to play right away. They filed an injunction and were able to get that essentially stayed for the time being. So that rule didn't apply for the last couple of months, but that was a temporary change. Now it is a more permanent change and something that will be very, very interesting to kind of watch unfold over the next, even couple of weeks, because this is something that will likely be ratified on Monday. They're meeting on Monday to ratify any of these things that they see fit, and to be totally honest with you, I would be shocked if this was not ratified on Monday, and that is right smack dab in the middle of this transfer portal window we have going on, which is just a remarkable thing to think about. It's something that you're kind of throwing a grenade already into a crazy situation, so it's going to be wild to watch. There's no two ways about that. I think some of the things that everyone has kind of worried about over the last little bit when you talk about the transfer portal and everything around it is kind of coming true slowly, right? You start to see more and more people start transferring, more and more people start transferring multiple times, and now that we're giving them total autonomy to do essentially whatever they want with the transfer portal, it's going to lead to problems. Now, I have seen some people out there start saying, so people can transfer in the middle of weeks and start playing for another team. No, that cannot happen. There are still those transfer portal windows that have to be abided by. You cannot just enter whenever you want. But at the end of the day, if you are in good academic standing with both your school and the school that you are going to, you will have no problem. So obviously a huge flip. It's something that is thrown into this transfer portal period that has already had a couple of ers and ahs here and there, not necessarily the big-time craziness that I think a lot of us were expecting, but still a lot to unpack for sure. And I think there will definitely be a couple more people that start looking at that as a real possibility, especially people that have transferred multiple times but might not love the situation they're in. They might start looking at it as a real possibility to find somewhere else to play instead of possibly having to sit out a year. So, and one of the other things from this ruling that I think will really, really impact kind of the future of the sport is we've seen more and more some of these kids that will enter in the December window and then go back in the spring window, depending on different circumstances. Caden Proctor did it this year, and there were many others actually that did it in this cycle. I feel like it was something around like 15% of the people that had jumped in had already been in earlier this year. So just a remarkable number, and something that I think will only increase as you give these players more power to kind of do whatever they want to a certain extent, to have the ability to kind of jump around willy-nilly and do these things. As long as you have the grades, you're good to go type of mentality. I've talked about it a number of times, and I think the big thing here is giving all these players all this power is mostly a great thing, right? You want to see these players be able to find the right place for them to end up and start playing really good football. But at the end of the day, when you look at the amount of power that we are giving these kids, the amount of ability we're giving these kids to move around and do things of that nature, but not giving them the ability to do that smoothly or to do that with all of the knowledge in hand, or to not get it taken advantage of in certain circumstances, in those scenarios, we're not really doing them justice. There's this idea, I think, around college sports in particular right now, because of all the changes that are going on, that we need to make it as much of a professional sport as possible, so make these kids as much in control of their futures as possible. And to be totally honest with you, it's not that I am against these kids having all the choices in the world, and they absolutely should be able to find another place if the place that they start off with does not work out. I just think there's a difference between doing something like that, holding kids, for 5 years. I think that's the worst idea. But also, there has to be a happy medium here, right? There has to be an area where we can all sit down and say, okay, this makes sense. This is a structure that benefits the kids in the sense that they can find where they want to go, but also doesn't necessarily give them full autonomy to kind of just play around with the transfer portal as they see fit. That is obviously a very dangerous way to go about business. That's a really dangerous way for schools to be able to look at the transfer portal. I think when you look at this way the schools that are approaching it right now, it's a very aggressive approach. Like, let's be totally honest. And I think if this was fully ratified, which it's going to be, let's be totally honest, that becomes tenfold. The ability for these teams to essentially just parachute into a kid's living room and say, we'll offer you X, Y, and Z if you come over here. Maybe they're not even willing to do that. Maybe the X, Y, and Z that they're referring to don't really exist. So that's really the biggest worry for me, is there's this era right now that we're in where there's so much change, there's so much instability, there's so much uncertainty, that I think coaches are kind of capitalizing off that. And it's not necessarily to say that they shouldn't be. There is an era here where certain schools have the ability to tip the scales in their direction. And if they weren't doing that, then their fans would not be too happy with them, I think. So it's not necessarily that they shouldn't be fully going after these kids and being aggressive in the portal and, as bad as it sounds, possibly using some of the gray area in NIL to their favor, but there's a dangerous road here. And I think we're, down at quite a ways at this point, but I think this just pushes us almost over a cliff, to be totally honest with you, at least for the next little bit. But let's get to the NIL agreement that was also struck in this meeting. I think this is something that obviously we will probably hear less about just on a day-to-day basis in college football, but will be very interesting in the long term to figure out kind of what does NIL look like overall. So NIL has been something that they've been talking about for quite some time, trying to find some type of structure that just makes sense. And I think they were able to find at least something. It sounds like the universities are now allowed to help the athletes find the NIL contracts that they would like to participate in. So it's a very interesting difference from when the kids essentially had to go out and find it on their own. These collectives were totally separate from the school. Now the school can kind of get involved with the collectives and push the kids in that direction to help them find the NIL deals that they would like. Now, the trade-off in that is that any deal over $600 has to be disclosed to the school. So all of the big-time deals that we've heard so much about behind closed doors will now not be behind closed doors. They will be public record that everyone can kind of get and access pretty much at will. So it'll be a really interesting thing that definitely helps the idea of NIL going forward. It helps people who are kind of on the fence about NIL, who are very skeptical of the idea. It gives them, an idea of at least we have some type of control over this. We have some type of, I don't know what word I'm looking for, some type of structure over this entire operation. We'll know what's going on. We know that some schools aren't wielding this incredible amount of money from some unknown source to get a big-time recruit because those would have to be disclosed now. And this comes after there was a big deal down in Miami with two big-time women's basketball players, Haley and Hannah Cavender, who actually were in the news today because they're going back to Miami. But they got into a little bit of trouble with essentially going to straight meeting with a booster named John Ruiz. That would now be legal. That would be totally allowed under this new ruling, and that would be something that would have avoided Miami and these two girls from quite a bit of headache. But at the end of the day, they're a little bit later on this than some people would have hoped. And I think the interesting thing about this is there's going to be so much change going on with NIL, with the transfer portal, with conference realignment, with all of this stuff, and you'd love to have an idea of just what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And I think this NIL rule at least helps that. You won't really get to see the underbelly of college football. I don't think 99% of us watching this or doing this will ever be able to see exactly what happens every single day throughout college football, because some of it is very, very much behind closed doors and will never find the light of day. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this kind of impacts not only the way that NIL deals are done for these college kids, but how it's kind of viewed by the public. You'll be able to see a lot of this stuff firsthand. You won't have to take, some random NIL valuation for face value. You'll be able to look up the number, and unless they're just racking up $500 deals, you'll be able to get an idea of what the pecking order is. And it'll be a very, very interesting thing once it comes around to possibly, becoming contracted employees or becoming more involved, the university that is, in paying these athletes. You'll be able to see the pecking order. You'll be able to kind of get an idea of maybe how the salary, how the collective bargaining, whatever it is, revenue sharing, whatever that ends up being, how that can be split among the athletes. You'll get an idea of who brings in the most money, who brings in the least, who is the most advantageous for us to pile money into, who is the least. So it's going to be really weird, and I think both these rules are going to be very influential for the short and long terms of this sport. Just the future of the sport is going to ride a lot on these rules. I think the transfer portal rule is dangerous in a lot of different ways. I think it will have a negative impact not only on the sport as a whole, but but on the kids. I think it really will have a bad impact on these kids. I think there will be a number of kids who are super talented that just get caught up in a spur-of-the-moment decision, decide to move on from a place that they probably should stick it out at, and fall short. And it's not necessarily something that doesn't happen now, but I think it will happen at a much higher clip if we give these kids essentially free reign over the transfer portal. Now, the NIL rule, I think, is something where you can take it or leave it. To be totally honest with you, I don't really fully understand why they have to disclose all this information, but at the very least, it will give everyone the idea of, at least you know what's going on. You have a peek behind the curtain. You have an idea of what the NIL deals look like and kind of how they're operating. So at the very least, it gives you the people that are very skeptical of the NIL world, it gives them a peek inside it, so they can draw maybe a more accurate conclusion. Maybe they'll draw the same one, but maybe at least a more informed solution. So I think it'll be really interesting to watch these two things unfold. The transfer portal rule will start unfolding very, very soon because it's being ratified on Monday, and we are still in the midst of a big-time transfer portal window. So I think there could be some guys that are rethinking their decision right about now. And then the NIL rule will have long-lasting effects for quite some time until a new structure is put into place. So we'll keep a track on all of these. We'll see what happens over the next few months, over the next few weeks, and over the next few years. I think a lot of stuff is going to be unfolding over the next little bit, and maybe these rules don't last for very long. Maybe they last forever. Who knows? But at the end of the day, we will keep you updated with everything you need to know there. But we're going to take our first break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about Colorado. There has been so much coming out of Boulder that I want to break down just where they're at and where they could be going into 2024. And we will do that right after this. So stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, everybody, welcome back. We just talked about a new transfer portal rule as well as a new NIL rule that was passed recently by the NCAA. It will be ratified on Monday, it seems, and it will shake up the transfer portal window in the short term, but also college football in the long term. So we will definitely keep an eye on that for you all. But let's talk about Colorado. The Buffaloes have been a very, very interesting thing to watch. Since Deion stepped on campus, there was a lot of excitement going into last year. They started with that huge win over TCU, the team that just came off a trip to the national title. You're thinking maybe this is a really special team that can catch lightning in a bottle, and then things kind of slowly fall off hill. And they end up going 4-8. Not necessarily the year that they had expected, but to be totally honest with you, I don't think it was going to go much better than that, looking at the roster that they had a year ago. But if we know anything about Deion, he changed things around very, very quickly. Actually, before we jump into all of the stuff happening around Colorado, I do want to address something. Had a segment, I believe yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, talking about Deion and the 6 teams that he had kind of allowed to be drafted, or to draft Deion, or excuse me, to draft Shedeur and Travis Hunter. But apparently he has disputed those claims vehemently. He says that is not something that has happened ever. So first of all, I just want to apologize for being a little bit too early on that one. We'll definitely be a little bit more patient in the future before coming out with something like that, but it'll be interesting to see how that develops, because he has said in the past that Shedeur will not go to just any old team. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, and we will definitely revisit that. But getting back to this Colorado team and what's going on going into 2024, Dion's going into his second year, and as we know, nothing really stays the same very long in Boulder, Colorado, especially when you're talking about the roster up there. They have lost already 14 guys in this portal window. Now, some important, some not so much. I think there were a couple offensive linemen that people made a bigger deal out of leaving than they had to. There were some defensive players that probably the same. Elton McCaskill is the one that I think is a big-time hit. Cormani McLean looks like it was a big-time hit, but I think everyone around that Colorado program, including Dion and probably Cormani McLean, would agree that that just wasn't necessarily the best place for him. In fact, Dion said that. He said this was not the place for him to succeed the best, but hope he finds a great place to end up and play the football that he's capable of. So it'll be really interesting to not only see what those players, where those players end up, but how productive they are and how big of a hit this is to the roster. Dion is no stranger to finding the next best player, to going after the transfer portal really aggressively, and he's actually enlisted his son's help throughout this time. I think there's been a ton of different recruiting tactics over the last little bit. This is one that I have not seen before. Shiloh Sanders has put something on his Instagram story, I believe this was yesterday, where he essentially just said, if you are a defensive portal guy, DM him on Instagram. If you're an offensive portal guy, DM Shadur on Instagram. So this is not something that I've ever seen before. He did also add the caveat that they are not last chance U, so don't need any guys that just are looking for a chance to play football, a last chance to play football in a lot of those cases. But at the end of the day, this is something that is comfortably the most brazen way to recruit that I've seen probably ever. I've never seen someone, especially a player, be so obvious and so outright about recruiting kids and about trying to get kids in this window. So it's quite the wild thing to watch. There's no doubt about that. It is a great way for a million DMs to start coming in from random kids who have nothing better to do on a Wednesday afternoon. But at the end of the day, you probably could cycle through those and find a couple of names that are big-time players. So definitely a very interesting way to go about things. Definitely something that I have not seen, but at the end of the day, it seems to probably going to work with the way that Colorado has been able to kind of build out the transfer portal in the past. And with those two guys, they're very charismatic, just like their father, so maybe they'll be able to pull it off. But I think when you talk about Colorado, everyone likes to bring up last year and say, well, they fell short of expectations last year. Why should I expect anything more this year? And while I do think there is some merit to that, there is some merit to this idea that, maybe they haven't made that big time jump. They are a considerably better team just from a roster standpoint and from the eye test than they were a year ago. I think when you look up and down this roster, it just looks better. The O-line in particular is much better than it was a year ago. Bringing in guys like Tyler Johnson, Jordan Seaton was a huge recruit that they brought in. Those are guys that are going to be building blocks for this upcoming year. Now, they have to really, what word am I looking for right now? They have to really show up every single Saturday, I guess is the way I'll put it. But there's so many different things that have to fall into place. But when you look at this roster at face value, there's tons of more talent on it than there was a year ago. You add BJ Green, a great edge rusher from Arizona State. That's a guy that is an actual game changer for you. Not these, guys you can just kind of pick up from different places that just aren't going to find playing time. You now have people that are big time, Pac-12 players that are one of the top 100 players in the country, according to Blake Brockermeyer over at CBS and BJ Green. So they now have the ability to not only, pick up a number of portal commits, but get the guys that are big time players and can really impact that team. Now, the big question of that, and I have this question all the time about Colorado, I go back and forth on it, daily, is I know that Dion is this remarkable motivator. I know that he's someone that really cares about his kids. I know that he's someone that people love to play for. There's no two ways about that. But I also know that rolling kids in and out of a program is not necessarily the best way to set up kind of a cohesive culture or a cohesive identity throughout the program. And that's something that when you look at the very, very successful programs in the country, when you look at Alabama, when you look at Georgia in particular right now, when you look at Texas, what they're starting to form over there in Austin, there is an identity to whatever they do. There is a culture that is through every single player, not just the starting players, not just the stars, not just the guys that you just brought in from the transfer portal that you think are going to start. It's literally everyone from top to bottom. That's a lot tougher to pull off when you are, filing kids in and out, when you're playing around with depth charts essentially every single week, when you're doing the things that Colorado is kind of forced to do to a certain extent, because when he took over, let's be honest, that roster was not great by any means, and he's created a roster that at the very least is very interesting to watch and has a couple of just remarkably talented kids on it. So he's obviously brought this quite a long way, but the thing that usually gets teams over the hump, the thing that usually gets teams to conference championships and to the playoff and possibly competing for national championships is that culture, is that thing that you lean your hat on, having those players that have been through battles year over year and have done things that bring them together. And I think that's something that in this transfer portal era has kind of been overlooked or just been kind of discounted more than it should be. And that's not to say that Deion is not fully capable of pulling that off. The next 3 weeks or so are going to be huge for them because right now, to me, they're kind of a wild card team in the Big 12, a team that could pull off some incredible things if they can protect Shedeur Sanders and allow him to be the player that he's capable of being. But I'm still very questionable if that's going to be able to happen. If they can have a huge portal window, they can become straight up contenders in this conference. Now, there's a difference between being contenders on the page and being contender on Saturday on the field. So I think that's the biggest worry for me is he can put together the most beautiful roster you've ever seen in your entire life. If all of these guys just got together, only a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, it's going to be a lot tougher to create that kind of atmosphere that garners winning in a consistent fashion. So, but all that being said, I talked about how great of a motivator Deion is, and his ability to hit big at Colorado is definitely there. The question to me as we kind of move forward in the Deion Sanders era is this year the last year that he's going to be in Boulder? And it's not necessarily that I've gotten any hints that he is finding his way out or anything like that. There were some rumors that he might follow Shedeur to the NFL. I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at Deion as a person and Deion as, a football coach, he's been someone who, a football coach in pretty much any industry in this world, it's always about, climbing the ladder, getting up to that next position, getting up to that next job, that next big job. And Deion's no different, obviously. I don't think Colorado is where he's going to be setting up shop for the next, the next, 30 years. I don't think he'll be there for remotely that long, to be totally honest with you. And my big question, I suppose, is he's been able to pull off this, tightrope act of being someone who was majorly successful at the FCS level, at the HBCU level, and then coming up to Colorado and having kind of a shaky start, but having all this energy around the program, having some really talented guys on the program, having this kind of swagger and this really cool energy that kids are attracted to. What happens if they fall on their face this year as well? Do those portal kids that are looking at Colorado immediately and setting up visits? I mean, Dominic Williams, one of the big-time recruits in the portal right now, set up a visit to Colorado, even though Texas and Oklahoma were after him. So it gives you an idea of the type of people that he's competing with right now. What happens if they go 6-6 next year? If they go 5-7, God forbid. I mean, Shedeur after this year is gone. Shiloh's gone. Travis Hunter's gone. So as much as I want to believe that Deion will, even if things go really poorly and even if things, fall off a cliff, I really want to believe that he will be the coach of Colorado going forward. And I tend to believe he will, but it's a very, very questionable thing. It's one of those things that I'm not sure if this is, first of all, a sustainable model, the way that he's set up Colorado just in general. And I'm really not sure what happens if that model starts to take a hit. If there is some type of issue that they run into that really creates a big time problem for them. So Colorado's going to be unique. Deion's going to be unique. We know that. And I personally love Deion. I think he's a remarkable thing for the sport. I think he cares about his players a lot more than people give him credit for. I think he's a very good football coach. I just kind of question what the future of Colorado football looks like. I question if this model is sustainable, and if this model falls flat on its face, is he going to be there to pick up the pieces? And I very much hope he will be. I think it will be better for Colorado if he is around for a couple of years and is able to create kind of a more sustainable culture around there. But there's a real reality where in December you're looking at a Colorado team that has just lost their starting quarterback, has just lost one of the best players in the country in Travis Hunter, and Deion Sanders is going right with them. And I don't know if that's to a bigger college job. I don't know if that's to the NFL. I don't know if that's just to retirement. But at the end of the day, I think Deion loves coaching this sport. I think he loves Colorado, but I think if one thing goes wrong in that situation, plenty will follow it. So it'll be interesting to see how they can handle this upcoming year. I personally hope they'll be very successful because it gives me a lot of things to talk about. They are a very interesting bunch over there, and I love to watch them not only play football, but every other thing they do is really interesting out there. So I personally hope that they succeed this year, that Deion creates kind of a good culture out there, and when he does move on, it's in a situation where Colorado can, sustain it over the next couple of years when he does move on. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of uncertainty out there, and not that I would be overly worried if I was a Buffs fan, but I definitely keep one eye open, I suppose, the best way to put it. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to do some spring game previews. We got into a ton last week. There is a little bit more of a manageable load this week, so we will break down all of the stuff happening tomorrow right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked a little bit about Colorado going into their second year under Deion, kind of an idea of how that is a interesting ship to be on right now. A little bit unsteady, but could be plowing forward and dominating the Big 12 this year. So tons of different directions they could go this year, but broke down a little bit of what could possibly happen and what I kind of expect to happen, to be totally honest with you. But let's jump into some spring game previews. There is tons of stuff happening on Saturday, and let's start with the game that is nationally televised. The Michigan Wolverines will be at noon on Fox. Definitely a game that everyone is looking forward to, especially the Wolverine fans, but this is a game that, with the storylines coming into it, kind of write themselves, right? You talk about, championship hangover. It is a very real thing, especially in college sports. It's something they're hoping to avoid this year, especially with a coaching change. Not going to be an easy thing to do, but we'll be able to see at least what this team looks like. Are they still playing with the same speed, the same intensity that Jim Harbaugh brought pretty much every single day? And then 18 guys off to the league. How do the new guys look? How do the replacements look? How do the younger guys stepping into big roles? How are they kind of making that adjustment? And are they making it smoothly, or does it look like there's a considerable gap between last year and this year's team? And then which quarterback stands out, if any of them? The question that I think everyone is wondering right now, it seems like Alex Orji has had a very good spring, but you never really know until you get in front of live ball and have an idea of what he looks like with, guys running straight at him and receivers running all over the place and just a lot of hectic things happening around him. So definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. But what I'm watching for in particular is kind of mainly the back end of this defense minus Will Johnson. I know exactly who he is. I'm not worried about that at all. Losing Rod Moore to injury and losing Keon Saab to the portal were two big-time losses. I think those were guys that were going to be big-time players for them this year, and they're going to need other guys to step up. Now, there's plenty of talent in that room, so I'm not overly worried necessarily, but there's definitely something to keep your eye out on as we go through the game tomorrow. I expect the defense to win the day, but does the back end make a couple of plays in that, or is it more of a defensive front kind of domination type thing? How does the O-line bounce back from losing 5 of the top 6 guys? Kind of goes right in hand with that D-line that we just talked about. I think there is a lot of worry that, losing guys like Zach Zinter, losing guys like Drake Nugent, there's such an ability there to know exactly what you're getting from those guys day in, day out, because they've been there for so long and they started for quite some time and they've done really remarkable things there. So losing guys like that and having to replace them, no matter who you're replacing them with, and they have plenty of talent in that room, obviously, but it's going to be tough for them to be as productive as they were a year ago, and they might have to be more productive with the quarterback that is going to be behind him, maybe not being as decisive as someone like J.J. McCarthy, who was so good at getting the ball out of his hands and putting it on target that it might not be the strength of the next guy. So definitely something to watch there. And then who are the wide receivers that stand out the most early, and who is the quarterback hitting them? Because I think there's an idea in this offense that you pretty much just have to set it up in a way where you put the quarterback on the field that puts your passing game in the best situation possible. I think you will have a good running game. You have Donovan Edwards, you have Khalil Mullings, you have Alex Orji. Even if he's not a starter, you have him in different packages that you can utilize him in, I think. But you have to be able to throw the ball. You just have to be able to get the ball in the hands of the wide receiver, stretch out the defense, and give your running game a shot, right? So I think it could be that, maybe Alex Orji looks really, really solid in terms of, doing the run game and making everything go very smoothly, but maybe he's not quite hitting the wide receivers quite as well as Jack Tuttle is, or quite as well as Jaden Davis is. And it'll be really interesting to watch if that, plays a part in that quarterback battle, because right now it's definitely Alex Orji's job to lose, but passing is not necessarily his strong suit. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch if he can, show up on Saturday and really prove some people wrong. But let's move on. Only an hour after that, we have the Notre Dame game. And I think the storylines for this one are very interesting. A new transfer quarterback from a North Carolina school in the ACC. So they're kind of running it back from last year. And last year was not a bad year by any means, a 10-3 year for them. But they do have a couple of things they need to improve on. One of the big things I'm watching is, will they be more dangerous at wide receiver? They just absolutely have to be. I think Jaden Greathouse is going to take a huge step forward this upcoming year and will be a big part of that offense. Also, who's taking the place of Audric Estime, and can he fill the shoes? Obviously, you have someone like Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, so plenty of talent in that room, but Audric Estime was a huge piece of this team, and leadership-wise was a huge piece, so definitely someone to watch there. What I'm watching for kind of in particular is this back end. Just like Michigan, I think with Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison, you have that foundation, but you need 5 guys to make it all work, right? So it'll be really interesting to see, especially losing both outside corners. It's going to be really interesting to see if they can kind of bounce back from that and handle that the way that I kind of expect them to. Xavier Watts is one of the best safeties in the entire country. Benjamin Morrison, one of the best nickels in the entire country. So they'll have plenty of help around them, but you really need those outside corners to be big-time players if you want to keep up with some of the passing attacks that they're going to face. And then C.J. Carr has been getting a ton of big-time praise. He's been getting comparisons to Jimmy Clausen and comparisons to Brady Quinn throughout his time in spring in Notre Dame, and I really am interested to watch him, see if he is as advertised, and see if he can be the guy that they really want him to be in the future. Obviously does not have to start this year, but definitely someone that could elevate that position for Notre Dame going forward. And then we talked about Jaden Greathouse. Has he taken that step forward? It sounds like he has in the spring, but definitely a lot of stuff still up in the air for him. At the same time, kicking off is Texas A&M. Definitely want to watch out for this one. The storylines write themselves, obviously. A start of a new era with Mike Elko taking over as the head coach over Jimbo Fisher. A very, very interesting and kind of nasty divorce there, but I think better for both parties, to be totally honest with you. How does post-injury Connor Wegman look is something that I'm watching very, very closely. And you had tons of guys transfer out. Is that a good or a bad thing? Sometimes when you lose guys, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. You kind of wave them goodbye, wish them best luck, and move on with your day. Some guys, it's a really big deal. So it'll be really interesting to watch. More specifically, definitely watching that D-line. They lost Walter Nolan. They lost LT Overton. Still plenty of talent in that room. There's no two ways about that. But definitely two guys that they really were counting on going into this year that we will have to watch, see if any other guys have stepped up throughout the spring. Is Connor Wegman playing with confidence and with freedom? He's learning a new offense this year with Colin Klein coming in over from Kansas State, and it's going to be hard on him, but I think the best version of him is a gunslinger that just kind of goes out there and lets it rip. Just lets the ball kind of flow out of his hand, because he's such an elite thrower of the football that I'm going to be really interested to watch him whenever he does get that chance to kind of step into the spotlight. And if you can do it comfortably, then Texas A&M gets very interesting very quickly. And then how do the players respond to the new coaching staff? I love Mike Elko. I think he's going to be a huge success, but there's always that question whenever you hire a new head coach and he brings in his staff. How do they kind of respond to the new way of things around campus is always a very interesting thing to watch. But let's move on to the 2 p.m. slate, and we got Texas to start here. The storylines are pretty obvious here, right? Texas is quote-unquote back. They were in the playoff a year ago and were able to be at the table. Now, was that a flash in the pan or a sign of what's to come? That's really the question that's going to be answered this year. The big other answer is they reloaded that wide receiver room with tons of talent from the portal, Isaiah Bond being the main among them, but can they live up to the hype of last year's? You have guys like Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell walking out the door, Jordan Whittington as well. So tons of talent came in the door, but doesn't necessarily guarantee the same production that you have walking out of it. So it'll be really interesting to watch what happens there. And how do you replace the duo of Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy? Because the D tackles right now apparently look a little bit rough in spring practice. There are some guys that are starting to stand out, Jere Bledsoe being one of them, but I do think they will be picking up guys in the portal, and we'll try to figure out the best way to kind of patch that big time hole that they have created for themselves. But what I'm watching for is, does Quinn Ewers and the receivers look like they're on the same page? Tons of new guys that have to produce pretty much right away, and Quinn Ewers getting the ball in their hands is going to be the way they do that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. Are they on the same timing? Are they on the same page when they're going through the big-time plays that they're going to have to make? Is the edge rushing as strong as it seems to be from a roster perspective, and what does the rotation look like there? You have a really talented young kid in Colin Simmons coming out of high school. You have Justice Finkley there. You have Ethan Burke there. Baron Sorrell, another guy. So tons of guys to rotate in. And then finally, will they have a game is one of the biggest things I'm watching for. There is big-time rain in the forecast, so hopefully the football gods and Mother Nature will smile on Austin, Texas tomorrow, and we'll be able to watch some football, but definitely something to keep your eye out on. If they do not have the game, it sounds like it will just be scrapped, and they will move forward with their spring ball as scheduled, and we'll lose out on that. So hopefully that does not occur, but definitely something to keep your eye out on. At 2 p.m. as well, the Oklahoma Sooners are in action. So the storylines here are, Brent Venables going into year 3. Can he keep the train rolling going into the SEC? He did a great job last year going 10-2 in the regular season after a very disappointing first year, to be totally honest. But is he able to kind of keep that rolling? There are a lot of people doubting this team going into the SEC. Can you take advantage of that. There are a lot of people hyping up, your biggest rival in Texas while talking you down. So how do you kind of change that narrative and handle that going into the SEC? And then can Jackson Arnold reach that lofty potential? He has so much ability. He has so much arm strength and athletic ability that I would love for him to be able to, but it's going to be kind of up to the O-line. That does not look very solid right now, which is definitely something that I'll be watching for. Who are the O-linemen that look okay? Who are the O-linemen that might be problems? And who are the O-linemen that will not be on Oklahoma's roster in a couple of days here? But what I'm watching for in particular, the wide receiver group, is it as special as it looks on paper? Because when you look up and down these names, there are tons of guys that can make big-time plays for them. We talked about it yesterday with Jaden Gibson, but there are tons of guys around him. Deion Burks has been making big-time plays, so very, very excited to see what happens there. Is this defense as aggressive and fast style that that Brent Venables wants it to be? He has made a lot of money throughout his career being the guy that has hard-nosed defenses, and while OU has slowly started to become that more and more as he's been on campus, there has been, it's not quite to the Brent Venables level, and hopefully they can take another step forward. We'll be able to get an idea at the very least on Saturday. And then is Jackson Arnold the leader that they need him to be? Dylan Gabriel has moved on to Oregon. You're losing a big-time guy there where, he has that leadership ability. He has the experience that everyone kind of follows his lead. Jackson Arnold doesn't, but he can absolutely be the leader that you need him to be. So I will definitely be watching that very closely. Florida State is at 4 p.m., the last game we'll get to here. The storyline's very clear. Tons of chaos around your program. How are you going to respond to it? All of the debacles, all of the lawsuits. You just got to go play football at the end of the day if you're a Florida State Seminole right now. Jordan Travis out, DJ Uiagalelei in. Can he be the same guy that Jordan Travis was to this program? It's going to be really hard to, but apparently he's been able to make big-time strides. And then you have a lot of transfers coming in on that offensive side of the ball. Can they replace the big names leaving like Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson and Trey Benson? All of the guys that were hugely important to the undefeated season they had a year ago are now out the door. So you got to make sure that you have the guys to replace them. Definitely will be watching for that. The edge rushing I'll be watching very closely. Does it look as dominant as it looks on paper? Does the interior defensive line look as worrisome as it might look on paper? Also, who are the starters on the back end of that defense? And does Fentrell Cypress kind of take the step forward that a lot of Florida State fans have been waiting for since he's got on campus? And then who's the leader of this team? You lost so many big-time leaders, including Braden Fisk and Jared Verse and all these guys that were big-time players to this team, Jordan Travis being the main among them, and you got to replace all of them. So it's going to be really interesting to see who are the guys leading the huddles, who are the guys getting in people's faces, doing the things that, you don't necessarily love to do, but someone has to do. So tons of spring games to watch, tons to get to on Saturday. Definitely will have multiple TVs rolling on that day, but we're going to take our last break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about some Cinderella candidates for 2024. The door is obviously open for some more Cinderellas to get into the dance. Let's figure out if they're able to possibly stay there a while. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the spring games that are going on tomorrow, but now let's get to some Cinderella candidates for 2024. There are so many people that have been watching for that next TCU, that team that kind of blows up the party, and with the 12-team playoff, there is more ability for those teams to, at the very least, get into the dance. So I wanted to break down some of the teams that I'm watching in particular. I have a team per conference here that I want to get to, and let's start in the Big 12 with Texas Tech. This is a team that I am very, very interested in this year. I think their offense is really, really talented when you look at it at face value at the very least. Taj Brooks is one of the best running backs in the entire country. Micah Hudson is a freshman coming in at wide receiver. He was the only 5-star that was signed across the entirety of the Big 12 last cycle. Baron Morton is getting more and more comfortable in that offense. You added Josh Kelly from Washington State at wide receiver, along with Caleb Douglas from Florida, two guys that have big-time ceilings and will definitely help them reach the ability that this team has. So that offensive side of the ball has dudes all over the place. So as long as there's not injuries or anything big that happens to this team, I think they're going to produce on the offensive side of the ball. Now, the defense is a little bit sketchier. You know, there are some holes in that defense. Definitely returning some guys that will be big-time players for them, but especially on that back end of that defense, they lose guys like Tyler Owens and Dadrian Taylor Damerson that were absolutely huge for them, and losing them is big time. So you will need definitely young guys to step up in those places, but the ability to make that happen, I think, is very much on the table. You have tons of very good staffers there at Texas Tech, and the Big 12 is pretty wide open, especially with the schedule that Texas Tech has. They avoid Kansas State and Utah. That is absolutely huge. They do have a trip to Arizona, but later in the season, so maybe you can work out some of the kinks on that back end or get that offense up to its full ability by that time and give Arizona a little run for their money. Definitely a team that people, aren't necessarily looking at right now, but a huge reason that I'm watching them very closely going into this year is Joey McGuire. I think their head coach is someone that they absolutely nailed. He just feels like Lubbock, Texas to me. He's someone that really gives off that Texas Tech vibe and is so good at what he does, which is just being an elite motivator. He's someone that everyone wants to go play for. He's someone that everyone loves to play for, and I think that's a huge thing when you talk about this transfer portal era and all of the things going on that are kind of out of the control of the coach. One of the things that isn't is just being someone that is fired up to come to work every day, that, puts their best foot forward for their kids every single day, and that's something that he does at an insane clip. So Joey McGuire is someone that I have full faith in. I think he could lead them to a playoff berth. Maybe it's not this year, but this is a team that's capable of a lot of different things if you just give them, a little bit of ability. Baron Morton plays a little bit above what his baseball card might say, or Micah Hudson bursts onto the scene, or Josh Kelly hits big as a transfer. Any of these things happen, and Texas Tech could be a team that really blows up the Big 12. So definitely watching them there. But let's move on to the ACC and let's talk about Virginia Tech, a team that is so interesting to me because Kyron Drones is their quarterback, frankly. He is a guy that is such a big deal as you go through the ACC because there are very few games that they're going to play where they will not have the quarterback advantage. And that's something that is absolutely huge in college football as you go throughout. And it's something that cannot be taken for granted, especially in a conference like the ACC that is totally wide open and tons of new quarterbacks are coming in. Someone like Kyron Drones, who has been there for a while and has been productive in that offense, is a huge deal to have at the helm. Also, this team returns 22 starters from a year ago. Now, that does include the kicker and the punter, so they are losing two guys from the defensive side of the ball. But overall, returning everyone from the offensive side of the ball, returning your kicker and your punter is huge because it means you can probably convert drives into points very consistently, which is the ultimate goal, right? If you can keep putting points on the board consistently when you go down the field, you're going to have a lot of success. And then Brent Pry going into his third year as the Hokies head coach, someone that has improved the roster considerably since he's gotten there, and I will be very interested to see what he can do. I don't think this team will be much of a razzle-dazzle type team week in, week out. They won't put up like 70 points or anything crazy, but I do think you'll look up in week 5, they'll be undefeated walking into Coral Gables with a chance to take the ACC by storm by beating Miami. If they win that game, they have another big game against Clemson, but they get them at home. So there's this ability where if you can walk out of week 5 having beat Miami and being 5-0 in the ACC, the chances for this team are sky high. So they could very well be the Louisville of this team, a steady defense that doesn't give teams a lot of chances to, beat them. And then the offense just kind of relies on that quarterback play that Kyron Drones can provide and ride that to possibly the top of the ACC. So it'd be really interesting to watch if they can pull that off. But let's move on down to the SEC here. and talk about a team that we've talked about a little bit on here in the Kentucky Wildcats, a team that I feel like everyone is watching. This one was a little bit easier than the rest of them. They do return 17 starters, brought in portal guys like Brock Vandegrift, Jamori Macklin, Chip Trainum on the offensive side of the ball, returned big-time players on the defensive side of the ball like Deone Walker, J.J. Weaver, Maxwell Harrison, brought in a guy like Jamon Dumas-Johnson from UGA at linebacker. So they've done remarkable things. They've had about as good of an offseason thus far as pretty much anyone. I think this might be the most talented team that Mark Stoops has had, and he has done a lot with a lot less in the past. So definitely a team that I'm watching very closely. Brock Vandegrift has walked in the door and taken this thing by the horns, and it's been really, really cool to see. He's someone that, the sky is the limit for his talent ability, but coming into a new situation and being the leader that he had to be was always going to be something that was going to be a little bit tough, but it seems like he is taking that in stride and has been no problem for him. So the one real issue here is the schedule is not forgiving at all. You do have UGA at home, at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Texas, and Louisville on the schedule. So it's not necessarily going to be an easy road for them to get there, but let's just say they catch lightning in the bottle on September 14th and Brock Vandegrift can beat his former team in UGA. Things get really interesting really quickly. I think that Ole Miss game, that Tennessee game becomes a little bit more tight. And then if you win one or both of those games, that Texas game becomes a classic all of a sudden very quickly. So we'll be watching that very, very closely. Obviously a terribly hard schedule, but when you're in the SEC, that's kind of the game you play. I'll be really interested to see what this team can be. I think their ceiling is as high as it's been in quite some time around Lexington. So I think they're capable of doing incredible things as long as Brock Vandegrift can hit the remarkable ceiling that he has. But let's move on to the Big Ten here, and let's talk about Wisconsin. Luke Fickell is in year 2. This team is starting to become his team, which is a huge piece of what he can do. And when it becomes his team, usually at his former stops, they start winning some games. So definitely something to watch as we go into this season. They are losing Braylon Allen, which is a huge loss at running back, but they have Ches Malusi. They got a transfer from OU and Tawee Walker. So I think that's a very good duo that will definitely be able to pick up the slack there. I think bringing in Tyler Van Dyke was actually one of the more overlooked moves of the entire offseason. I think he did not have a good year last year. There's no two ways about that, but plenty of good football left in this kid, and I think a change of scenery could be exactly what he needs, and be very excited for this kid when he moves forward. I think another piece of this is I feel like they got the quarterback of the defense in the portal. I think they got Tackett Curtis from USC, and he is going to be a huge piece of that defense. Mike Tressel, the son of Jim Tressel, is someone that has done a great job with the defenses under Luke Fickell for quite some time, was at Cincinnati with him before moving over to Wisconsin, and having someone like that on the inside of your defense like Tackett Curtis could be absolutely huge. So very excited for him in particular. And then I think if you can run the ball and Tyler Van Dyke is accurate, things will get very interesting very fast. They do have Bama on the schedule, but no Michigan or Ohio State. They have Oregon and Penn State instead, which is not necessarily ideal, but they can probably handle it, I think. Luke Fickell is one of those guys that makes things happen when you are not looking. So I'm very interested to see what he can do this year with a Wisconsin team that looks really, really impressive from where I'm standing. And then finally, a group of 5 team here, and I want to go to Texas State. They did a great job in the portal, picking up a ton of big-time kids. A ton of group of 5 teams did. We had Tulane pick up some kids. Boise State did a great job in the portal. So definitely something that the group of 5 teams are benefiting from quite a bit, but Texas State might have done it better than anyone else. They got Jordan McLeod, the player of the year in the Sun Belt last year from JMU. He transferred in conference, so now he is G.J. Kenny's guy and the Bobcats guy at quarterback, so it'll be very interesting to watch him. I think Tunamiz Adiele from a Texas A&M transfer at D-line is an absolute difference maker, and he's someone that could be huge for them in the conference race and then possibly in the playoff race as they get deeper. I think the winner of the Sun Belt is right in the thick of things for that auto bid for the group of 5 teams. Pretty much them in the AAC, I think, would be the team or the conferences that are vying for that position, but I'd lean Sun Belt for the most part. I think Texas State has a remarkably high ceiling. I think Jordan McLeod is capable of catching lightning in a bottle and kind of doing something that no one expects, which is a group of 5 team possibly even winning a playoff game. So having someone like that definitely does open things up. Arizona State is a game on their schedule early in the season that if they win that and end up winning the Sun Belt, that could be the game that ends up putting them into the playoff. We'll be very interested to see what this team can pull off, and so many teams to watch. There's Cinderella candidates all over the country, but those are just a couple that I pulled out of those conferences. And then it'll be really interesting to see what they can pull off this year. I think all these teams are very talented, but a couple things definitely have to break their way. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. We will be back to normal, back to live on Monday, so no worries there. Your support does mean a lot to us. Please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for more content and updates. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys Monday.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.